Dry Hollow was too quiet when Billy rode in. Not the kind of quiet that meant peace. The kind that meant fear was living in the walls. His horse stepped slow, careful, like it could feel the weight in the air. It wasn't the heat. It wasn't the dust. It was the badge. Sheriff Dalton's badge. People whispered his name, but never loud. He wore the law on his chest and a devil in his hands. Everyone knew. His wife, Mary, had stopped speaking years ago. Her face always turned from the sun, her sleeves long, even when the desert burned. They said she fell, said she was fragile. But Billy had seen too many women like her to believe in stairs and clumsy feet. She sat alone on the church steps when he arrived, one eye swollen and fingers tight around a rosary. That was all Billy needed. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer comfort. He just tied his horse, stepped down, and looked at the sheriff's office across the square. Spit hit the dirt. His voice was low, more like a promise than a threat. Justice don't always come with a badge. Sometimes it comes with a grave. Billy walked through the center of town like a ghost wearing boots. People watched from windows, barely breathing. No one waved. No one spoke. Dry Hollow wasn't dead, but it was scared. And scared towns let evil grow roots. The sheriff's office sat heavy at the end of the street, old wood, rusted hinges, and a rocking chair that hadn't rocked in days. Billy didn't knock. He pushed the door open slow. The room smelled like whiskey and sweat. Sheriff Dalton sat behind the desk, feet up, eyes half closed like a man who thought he owned time. His badge caught the light, but his face didn't flinch. "You lost, boy?" he asked, voice thick with rot. Billy didn't answer. Just looked at the badge, then at the man. Dalton laughed. "You come to play hero. Got news for you. Heroes get buried out here." Billy stepped closer, boots thudding like drums. He stopped just short of the desk and said one thing. "Then dig me a hole next to yours." The room went quiet. Real quiet. The kind of quiet that always comes before thunder. Dalton's hand twitched near his gun. Billy didn't blink. Not once. Dalton's fingers danced near the handle of his revolver, but they didn't grab it. Not yet. He stared at Billy like he was trying to read a book written in blood. "You know who you're talking to," he growled. Billy tilted his head, slow. A man who hits what he can't control. Dalton stood. The chair creaked back. "You think you're some kind of savior?" Billy didn't move. "I'm just here to return what you gave." That's when the sheriff lunged. Not for the gun. He went for Billy's throat like a dog too stupid to fear. But Billy wasn't made of hesitation. He caught Dalton mid-charge, slammed him into the desk so hard the badge fell from his chest and hit the floor with a hollow thud. They struggled, fists flying, wood splintering. The window behind them cracked when Dalton's elbow hit it. Billy didn't stop, didn't pause. He grabbed Dalton's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him down, cheek scraping the floor. Townsfolk stood outside the window now, silent, watching. Mary among them, no tears, just eyes like fire. Dalton snarled, "This ain't justice." Billy leaned in close, voice steady. This is the receipt." And he pressed the sheriff's face down into the floor like he was making the man feel every weight he'd ever put on someone else. Dalton spat blood on the floor, teeth gritted, eyes wild. "You think they'll thank you?" he hissed. "This town needs men like me." Billy stood tall, breathing slow, looking down at the sheriff like he was nothing more than dirt with a badge. "This town don't need men like you. It needs men brave enough to stop you." Behind him, the door creaked. Heavy boots stepped inside. It was the deputy, young, nervous, fingers twitching near his belt. He looked at Dalton on the ground, then at Billy, then at the badge lying cold on the floor. For a second, no one breathed. Then the deputy did something no one expected. He kicked the badge away with his boot and stepped back outside without a word. Billy dragged Dalton to his feet. The sheriff tried to swing, but his arm was too weak, his pride too broken. Billy shoved him out the door into the light, holding him by the collar like a dog brought to heel. The town was waiting. Silent. Watching. Some mouths open, some fists clenched. Mary stood near the front, arms crossed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her face said everything. Billy walked Dalton into the middle of the street. The sheriff trembled, but tried to keep his spine straight. "You got no authority," he muttered. Billy looked at the crowd. "Don't need it." Then he threw the sheriff to the ground, right where the dust met the sun, and let the town decide what came next. For a moment, no one moved. Dalton lay in the dirt, panting like a hunted animal, face red, pride shattered. The town just stared. Years of silence held them tight, like chains too old to break, until Mary stepped forward. Slow, deliberate, her rosary still wrapped around one wrist like a scar. She stood over Dalton, looked him dead in the eyes, and spit, not in anger, not in rage, just quiet disgust. A murmur rolled through the crowd like thunder too far to run from. One by one, people started stepping forward. Old men, mothers, even the preacher. Nobody spoke. They just stood, surrounding Dalton, like a verdict with no words. Billy didn't tell them what to do. He didn't need to. He picked up the sheriff's badge from the dirt and held it out. No one took it, not even the deputy. Billy let it fall again, this time face down. A symbol buried. Dalton tried to crawl, but the townsfolk closed in, not with violence, but with presence, with truth, with every scar they'd buried under silence. And Billy, he just walked away, toward his horse, toward the horizon. He didn't need to watch. Justice wasn't always a bullet. Sometimes it was letting a man face what he made. The sun was falling fast, burning the edge of the sky as Billy rode out of Dry Hollow. His horse moved slow, like it knew there was no rush now. Behind him, the town was still, but different. He could feel it, like a fever breaking, like something finally breathed after years of choking. He didn't look back. That wasn't his way. Billy wasn't a hero. He was a storm that passed through and left things cleaner than before. The road stretched out, dry and cracked, leading into hills that swallowed sound. Somewhere out there was another town, another man with too much power, another silence that needed breaking. Billy lit a cigarette, hands steady, eyes sharp. He didn't smile, but something in him settled, like maybe this time the fight had been worth it. A coyote howled in the distance. The wind picked up. Dust rose like spirits from the ground. Billy disappeared into it, one man alone, riding into whatever came next, not for justice, not for glory, just because someone had to. By the time Billy reached the edge of El Monte, the moon had taken the sky. The town looked like it was holding its breath. Quiet streets, shuttered windows, lamps burning low. But something was off. Too clean, too quiet. He tied his horse to a post outside the saloon and stepped in. Inside, the piano was silent, tables mostly empty. A bartender wiped glasses without looking up. 3 men sat in the corner, eyes locked on Billy like they'd been warned he was coming. One of them had a scar across his neck, like someone once tried to silence him with steel. Billy didn't sit. He just scanned the room, reading it like a map of trouble. The bartender finally looked up. "We don't want problems," he said. Billy took one step forward. "Then don't make 'em." That's when a sound cut through the air. Soft, slow, deliberate. The back door creaked open and a man stepped in. Clean boots, silver vest. Star on his chest, but it wasn't justice it stood for. It was something meaner. The man smiled, slow and poisonous. "Heard you dealt with Dalton." Billy said nothing. The man kept walking until they were face to face. "I'm Marshal Clegg, and out here, we don't bury badges. We bury men who forget their place." Billy looked at the star, then into the man's eyes. "Good. I was getting tired of the quiet." Marshal Clegg didn't blink. He stood inches from Billy, close enough to smell the dust and gun oil on his coat. The room held its breath. Even the bartender stopped wiping the same glass he'd been pretending to clean. Clegg's smile never reached his eyes. "This ain't Dry Hollow," he said. "Men like you don't walk in here and tell stories." Billy tilted his head just slightly. "I don't tell stories. I end 'em." One of the men in the corner shifted in his chair, hand twitching near his holster. Billy didn't look at him, but the message was clear. "Move, and you die first." Clegg raised a hand and waved it, slow and casual. "Relax, boys. He's not worth the bullet." Then he turned his back on Billy and walked to the bar like it meant nothing. "Thing is," Clegg said, pouring himself a drink, "men like Dalton, they keep towns quiet. Orderly. That's something you don't understand, boy." Billy stepped forward, boots thudding on the wood. "He beat his wife and called it order." Clegg downed the drink in one gulp. "And what did you call what you did?" "Justice." Billy's voice came cold. "I call it not looking away." The silence in the saloon shifted. Less fear now, more curiosity, like the whole room was choosing sides without saying a word. Clegg turned again, slower this time. "You gonna make trouble here, son?" Billy let the question hang, then answered, quiet but sharp. "I don't make trouble. I just don't run from it." Clegg stared at Billy like he was measuring a coffin. The kind of look a man gives before he decides if it's worth the mess to kill you. The three men in the corner were getting twitchy. One licked his lips. Another cracked his knuckles like he wanted someone to hear he was ready. But Billy didn't move. He stood like stone, calm as a prayer before a storm. Clegg finally chuckled. "You've got a mouth on you. Must be real proud of yourself." Billy shrugged. "Pride gets men killed. I just don't like cowards hiding behind stars." The room dropped colder. Clegg stepped in again, this time slower. "You think just 'cause you rode into Dry Hollow and scared a few drunks, you're some kind of folk tale. You're not a legend. You're just next." Billy's fingers flexed once at his side. Not near the gun. Not yet. Just enough to say, "I hear you." Then came the voice from the stairs. "Marshal," it said, soft but sharp like a knife wrapped in silk. Everyone turned. A woman was standing halfway down the stairwell, red dress, cigarette in hand, and eyes like she'd seen too many men die to be impressed by one more. "Let him be," she said, walking down slow, hips swaying like the room belonged to her. "He's not here for you." Clegg's jaw tightened. "You don't speak for me, Lorna." She smiled, real small. "I don't need to, but you ain't as untouchable as you think." Billy watched them both. And in that moment, he knew this town wasn't just run by fear. It was wrapped in secrets, and the real story hadn't even begun yet. Lorna walked past Clegg without looking at him, her perfume cutting through the dust and tension. She moved straight to Billy, offered a quick glance, then turned to the bartender. "Pour him a drink. Top shelf. He looks like he's had a long ride." Billy didn't sit. He didn't drink. But he took the moment. Watched how Clegg's eyes followed her, not with love but ownership. She leaned against the bar, lit another cigarette. "You didn't come here for a fight, not yet." Billy nodded once. "I came looking for something worse." That made her smile, sad and sharp. "Then you came to the right place." Clegg turned and stormed out without another word, his boots cracking the boards like threats. The three men at the corner table followed, unsure if they were soldiers or shadows. The saloon exhaled when they were gone. Lorna looked at Billy, her eyes scanning deeper than most. "You really killed Dalton?" "Buried him in his own badge." She let the words hang. "He had a brother, down south, meaner, connected." Billy nodded. "Figured as much." She tapped ash from her cigarette, voice low. "So what are you really doing here?" Billy leaned in, just enough so only she could hear. "A preacher sent me a letter. Said something about ghosts in this town. Said the sheriff's not the only one keeping bodies buried." Lorna's face changed. Slight, but enough. She stood straight, killed the cigarette in the ashtray. "Preacher's dead." Billy's eyes narrowed. "How?" "They said it was the fever, but folks don't usually hang themselves from the rafters when they've got a cold." Outside, a dog barked once and then went silent. Billy's hand drifted near his holster, instinct more than plan. Lorna whispered, "You should leave. Tonight." Billy shook his head. "I just got here, and I haven't found the graveyard yet." Billy didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the rented bed in a room that smelled of old wood and newer regrets. The wind outside whispered through cracked shutters, and every creak in the floor below sounded like a footstep meant for him. He cleaned his gun in silence, not because he needed to, but because it kept his hands busy while his mind chased ghosts. Lorna's warning stayed with him, more than her perfume, more than her eyes. He kept thinking about the preacher who wrote him, a man named Elijah Graves, known for sermons that made people weep or walk out angry. Graves had written one letter, one line. "If you want to know what hell looks like, come to Marrow Creek." And now he was dead. Hung from the rafters, they said. Billy had seen too much to believe in coincidences. When the sun cracked the sky, he was already downstairs. The saloon was empty, except for the bartender sweeping up glass from the night before. "Where'd the preacher live?" Billy asked. The man didn't even look up. "Don't matter. Ain't no one living there now." Billy dropped a coin on the bar. I asked where. The bartender sighed. "Back end of town, just past the cemetery. Shack with a broken fence." Billy nodded and left without a word. The streets of Marrow Creek were quiet, too quiet for a town that pretended it had nothing to hide. As he walked, he could feel curtains shift, eyes watching from behind dirty windows. At the edge of town, the cemetery rose like a bad memory, crooked stones and unmarked graves stretching out like broken teeth. And there, just beyond it, stood the preacher's shack, weather-beaten, abandoned, but not silent. Something inside moved. Billy stepped onto the warped porch boards, each one creaking like a warning. The door to the preacher's shack was half open, swinging slow with the wind. He pushed it gently, letting the light spill in. Dust danced in the sunbeams like ghosts, and the air smelled of old paper and mold. Inside, everything was frozen in time. A table with an open Bible, pages curled from damp. A chair knocked over, a rope still hanging from the ceiling beam, frayed and stained. But what made Billy pause was the writing on the wall, carved, not written. Dozens of tiny crosses etched into the wood. Underneath them, words scratched deep and jagged. He buried them in the mine. Billy moved closer. There was blood on the carving, dried, dark and deliberate. He heard something shift in the back room. Slowly, he stepped over the broken floorboards, hand on his Colt. The back door was open, the curtains blowing like breath. On the ground was a torn piece of cloth, minister's robes, scorched at the edge. Outside, the cemetery lay still, but there were new graves, too many, all fresh, all unmarked. Billy crouched by one, ran his hand across the dirt. Still soft. As he stood, a cold voice came from behind. "They told you not to come." Billy turned. A boy, couldn't be more than 10, stood barefoot in the grass, staring at him with eyes too old for his face. "They buried him alive, mister. Said the screams would stop after a while." Billy felt his gut twist. "Who buried them?" The boy pointed back toward the town. "The ones with stars, and the ones in the church. They all knew." The boy stepped backward into the mist rising from the grass, then vanished like smoke. Billy stood there alone, the wind now colder, the truth darker than he'd feared. And for the first time in years, he felt something close to fear rising in his chest. Billy walked back through Marrow Creek with dirt still on his boots, and the boy's voice echoing in his skull. The sun was high, but the town felt colder now, as if its bones were finally showing. Every step brought silence, but not the kind you trust. This was the silence of people hiding behind curtains, swallowing truths like poison. At the saloon, Lorna was gone. The bartender didn't speak, just polished a clean glass, like it was the only thing in town that wasn't stained. Billy walked to the back of the building where a cracked map of the region was nailed to the wall. He studied it. South of town, an old silver mine, closed for over a decade. Rumors said it collapsed, but if bodies were buried, it wouldn't be under crosses. It'd be under rocks and lies. He grabbed his horse, packed his rifle, and rode toward the hills. The road turned to gravel, then dirt, then barely a trail. Buzzards circled above, riding thermals like they knew what was waiting. When he reached the mine, he found the boards ripped away, not collapsed, sealed, and then forced open again. He stepped off the saddle, tied the reins, and lit a lantern. The air that drifted from the shaft was wrong, wet, sour, and metallic. He entered slow, each step echoing like a gunshot. Inside, graffiti coated the walls, crosses, names, numbers. One name repeated over and over again, Clayton. Then a sound, not rocks, breathing. Shallow, fast, broken. Billy raised the lantern and caught the eyes of a man hiding in the dark, shirt torn, body shaking, face bruised like he'd fought shadows. "Don't make me go back," the man whispered. "Please." "I told them where the preacher hid the list. I didn't know they'd kill him too." Billy crouched. "What list?" The man looked like he might pass out. "Names, dates, who they buried, who paid." Billy's jaw tightened. "Who paid who?" The man looked up, one eye swollen shut. "The sheriff. The preacher found out about the train raids, the gold. The bodies were just messages." Billy stood, rage creeping in like a storm. The mine wasn't just a grave, it was a ledger, and the town's sins were written in bone. Billy dragged the trembling man out of the mine, the lantern still flickering against the walls, like the ghosts were watching him leave. Once outside, the sun stung his eyes, but it didn't wash away what he'd seen. The man, whose name he never asked, collapsed near the rocks, breathing like someone who hadn't in days. Billy gave him water, but his hands shook too hard to hold it. "You're not going back to town," Billy said, voice flat. "You ride east, you ride quiet, and you forget you ever saw me." The man nodded, crawled toward Billy's horse, and without another word, disappeared into the trees. Billy didn't watch him go. He turned back toward Marrow Creek, knowing what waited. The sheriff, the badge, the lies. All of it was tighter than a noose, and now Billy had the truth and the motive. Back in town, dusk had already painted the sky red. He walked straight through the main road, eyes forward. People stepped aside like they felt the weight on him. Or maybe they knew what was coming. At the edge of the sheriff's office, Billy stopped. The porch creaked as he stepped on it. The door wasn't locked. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and silence. The sheriff sat behind his desk, cleaning his gun slow, calm, like he'd been expecting this moment since the day Billy rode into town. "You found the mine," he said without looking up. Billy nodded once. "I saw your name carved in blood." The sheriff smirked. That preacher was always too righteous for his own good. Billy stepped forward, not even flinching. "You had him hung like a trophy. Then you buried your mistakes in the dark and paid the church to keep it quiet." The sheriff looked up, finally. "What are you gonna do, Billy? Shoot a lawman in his own office?" Billy leaned forward, eyes burning. "You ain't law. You're rot wearing a badge." And then he dropped the old preacher's Bible on the desk, stained, torn, pages ripped. Inside it was the list: names, dates, bribes, signatures, including the sheriff's. The room went still. Billy's hand hovered near his hip. "We both know," he said, "this town doesn't need a trial. It needs a grave." The sheriff stood slowly. "Then draw." The clock on the wall ticked once, loud as thunder, and both men moved. The sheriff's gun cleared leather first, but Billy was faster. A flash, a roar, then silence. The bullet tore through the sheriff's shoulder, spinning him back against the wall with a grunt of pain. He wasn't dead, but he'd never lift that arm again. Billy stepped forward, calm, like he'd just swatted a fly. The sheriff dropped his gun and slumped into his chair, blood darkening his badge. "Kill me then," he growled. "Do it. You'll be no different than me." Billy shook his head. "I ain't here to be different. I'm here to be done." He pulled out the ledger from the preacher's Bible and tossed it onto the desk. "But the town's gonna see what you did. Every name, every lie. No more hiding behind that desk." He turned, walked to the door, then paused. "You're gonna live, Sheriff, but not as a lawman, as a man everyone knows should be 6 feet under." Outside, the street was full. Townsfolk stood in silence, watching, waiting. Billy stepped onto the porch, holding the list high in one hand and the sheriff's scorched badge in the other. He tossed the badge into the dirt. Nobody moved. Then an old woman stepped forward, one of the preacher's flock. She picked up the badge and threw it into the gutter. That was enough. The silence cracked. People shouted. Some cried. A few spat in the dirt. It wasn't justice, but it was a start. Billy didn't stay for the rest. He walked to his horse, mounted slow, and looked back just once. The town wasn't healed, but it wasn't blind anymore. He'd done what he came to do. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting everything in gold and ash, Billy rode out, his shadow long behind him, the weight in his chest a little lighter than before. Billy rode through the dusk with nothing but the sound of his horse's hooves and the low wind brushing the dry grass. Behind him, Marrow Creek simmered in its own reckoning. He didn't need to look back. He never did. Every town he touched either buried its secrets or let them rot in the open, but either way, he never stayed to watch. He stopped by a creek a few miles out, knelt down and washed his hands. The blood was gone, but not the feeling. It clung under his skin, permanent like the desert sun. He stared into the water and saw the preacher's face again, and behind that, the faces of men he'd left broken, men who deserved it, but men just the same. "You ever stop running?" a voice asked behind him. Billy stood fast, hand near his gun, but it wasn't a threat, just a kid, maybe 17. Thin, dusty, carrying a rifle too big for his body. Billy looked him over. "You lost?" The kid shook his head. "Number I came looking." "For me?" The kid nodded. "Heard what happened in Marrow Creek. Heard you stood up to a badge that deserved a bullet. I want to ride with you." Billy sighed. "You don't even know me." "Don't have to," the kid said. "Men like you leave a trail." Billy looked at the horizon. It was dark now. Stars were starting to burn in the sky like old sins that refused to die. "You ride with me," he said. "You don't get glory. You get hunted." The kid didn't flinch. "I've been hunted since the day my pa put whiskey before food." Billy almost smiled. Almost. He nodded once. "Then saddle up. But know this, justice out here don't wear a white hat. Sometimes it's dressed in blood and silence." The kid mounted his scrawny horse and followed as Billy turned east. The road ahead wasn't lit, and the weight on Billy's shoulders hadn't gone. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't riding alone. They rode through the night in silence, the boy a few paces behind, watching Billy's every move like a disciple following a ghost. At dawn, they stopped at an old cattle station long since abandoned, just rotted wood, broken fences, and a well that hadn't run dry yet. Billy tied his horse to a beam and tossed a flask to the kid. "Name?" he asked finally. The boy wiped his mouth. "Eli." Billy nodded. "You ever kill a man, Eli?" The boy didn't blink. "Once. He tried to drag my sister out of the barn. I didn't wait to ask why." Billy looked at him long, not with judgment, but understanding. "Good. That means you know what it costs." They sat for a while, watching the morning stretch across the plains. Billy cut off a piece of jerky and passed it over. "Why ride with me?" he asked. "There's safer devils to follow." Eli leaned back, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Because folks like the sheriff get away with too much, and men like you don't let that happen." Billy stared at the dirt. "Men like me don't live long, either." Eli shrugged. "Ain't planning on living long if I'm watching people suffer while I do." There was fire in the kid, wild and reckless. Billy remembered when he had that same flame, before it got doused with blood, regret, and all the screams that don't fade. A hawk cried overhead. Billy stood. "There's a place, old church in the basin. Used to be a meeting spot for outlaws. Now I hear it's run by someone worse." "Worse than a sheriff who beats women?" Eli asked. "Worse," Billy said. "They say he's got a preacher's tongue and a hangman's rope, and folks listen." Eli stood too, tightening his belt. "Then we ride?" Billy nodded. "We ride." The sun was rising full now, lighting up the trail like a fire waiting to be walked through. And so they rode, one man haunted, one boy hungry, both heading straight into the mouth of something neither fully understood. But justice, out here, didn't wait for understanding. It only waited for someone bold or broken enough to chase it down. The trail to the basin ran dry and crooked, like a scar through the desert. As the sun climbed higher, heat shimmered off the rocks, painting mirages that danced just out of reach. Billy and Eli rode through it like ghosts, silent and focused. By noon they reached the ridge. Down below, nestled in the cracked earth like a secret, was the church, or what was left of it. The steeple leaned, half burned. The windows were boarded. But smoke curled from behind it, and horses were tied to posts out front. Too many for a place that was supposedly abandoned. Billy dismounted first. "We walk from here." Eli nodded and followed, rifle tucked low. As they neared the building, they heard it. Voices, not praying, laughing, mocking. A man shouted something, and a woman screamed. Billy's jaw clenched. He didn't need to hear more. He kicked the door open. Inside, the scene froze. A dozen men, ragged and armed, circled a woman on her knees. At the far end on what used to be an altar, stood a man in black, long coat, wide hat, silver cross hanging like a threat. His eyes were sharp, cold. "You're interrupting a lesson," he said calmly. Billy stepped inside, revolver already drawn. "Class dismissed." One of the men moved. A mistake. Billy fired. The shot echoed like thunder, and the man dropped. Chaos followed. Guns raised. Shouts. Eli ducked and fired, hitting another. Two more tried to rush Billy. One caught a bullet to the throat. The other hesitated and lost his chance. The preacher didn't move. He just watched. Even when his men fell around him, he didn't blink. When it was over, dust settled over bodies and blood. Eli panted by the doorway. Billy walked toward the altar. "You let that happen in a place built for mercy?" The preacher tilted his head. "Mercy is for the saved. These people are lost." Billy's hand didn't shake. He raised the gun. "Then I'll show you what justice looks like for the damned." But the preacher smiled. "You'll find I don't die easy." Billy didn't flinch. "Good, neither do I." The trigger clicked. Fade to black. The preacher's body hit the ground with a hollow thud, his silver cross swinging once before coming to rest in the dirt. Billy lowered the gun slowly, eyes locked on the lifeless face that somehow still seemed to smirk. Eli stood by the door, smoke curling from the barrel of his rifle, chest heaving. No one else in the church was moving, just the woman on the floor, sobbing quietly, clutching the ripped edge of her dress. Billy walked to her, knelt down, and spoke soft. "You're safe now." She nodded, eyes wide but blank, the way folks look after they've stared into something evil for too long. Eli helped her outside while Billy stood alone at the altar, looking up at the crumbling ceiling, the sun streaming in through the holes like judgment. He picked up the preacher's cross and studied it. A symbol don't mean much if the man behind it's rotten. He dropped it. It clattered on the stone and rolled to a stop near a pool of blood. Outside, the horses were restless. Something about the place felt wrong, even in victory. Eli came back, his voice low. "She says there's more. Says this man wasn't the worst of them. There's a judge, rides from county to county, calls himself the Hand. Says he makes the rules now." Billy didn't blink. "Where?" "South," Eli said. "Past the canyon, toward the border." Billy spat in the dust and mounted his horse. "Then that's where we go." "Billy," Eli said, pausing, "this ain't just revenge anymore, is it?" Billy looked back, face worn like old leather. "Never was." They rode out again, the church shrinking behind them, fading into the dust like all the sins buried in its floor. There was no peace in the saddle, only the next town, the next name, the next bastard who thought fear could make a man untouchable. But Billy had a different belief, that no one was above consequences, not even devils who wore robes or badges. The desert waited, and justice kept pace with their horses, quiet but hungry. The path south twisted through dry canyons where bones outnumbered flowers. Billy and Eli moved like shadows, cutting through the heat, eyes sharp for signs of the Hand. Stories followed the judge like smoke, towns where men vanished, women silenced, and children learned fear before they could read. In one border town called La Piedra, they stopped to water the horses. The place was half dead. Buildings leaning, doors chained shut. A silence too deep for any honest town. At the saloon, the barkeep didn't speak, just pointed to a man in the corner. Bald, scarred, one hand made of metal. "He used to ride with the Hand," the barkeep whispered. Billy walked over, pulled out the empty chair, and sat. The man didn't look up. "You're too late," he said. "The judge passed through 2 days ago. Took 3 girls and left 2 coffins. Said the town owed him tribute." Billy's jaw tensed. "Where'd he go?" "Toward the gulch," the man said. "Where the old fort crumbles. But don't chase him, cowboy. That man don't bleed. He makes devils look soft." Billy stood. "I've met devils. They all bled." Eli checked his revolver as they rode out. By dusk, the land cracked wider, opening to scorched earth and the outline of a decaying fort against a blood-orange sky. Buzzards circled, wind moaned through splintered walls. Billy dismounted slow. The silence here was heavier than death. "You feel that?" Eli asked. "Yeah," Billy said, "like something's watching." They moved into the ruins, careful steps echoing through ghostly halls. Then a voice rang out, smooth, deep, soaked in arrogance. "I've heard of you, Billy, the boy who thinks justice is still breathing." A figure stepped into view, dressed in black robes, a gavel hanging from his belt like a weapon. His face was pale, clean, eyes too calm. "You kill men. I sentence them. Same coin, different hands." Billy didn't smile. "I don't hide behind titles." The judge's voice dropped. "Then come forward and meet your judgment." Billy stepped into the dying light. "I ain't afraid of your court." The judge raised a hand. Dozens of guns clicked from the shadows. "Good," he said, "because this trial ends in fire." Billy didn't flinch. Not when the guns cocked. Not when the shadows moved. He just stepped forward, eyes locked on the hand. The judge grinned like a man playing a rigged game. "Drop your weapon," he said, "or you'll die with it in your hand." Billy looked at the rifle in his grip. Then he looked at Eli. And in that second, the world slowed. Eli nodded once. Billy dropped the rifle, but not in surrender. It hit the ground and fired. The bullet cracked the silence, hit one of the guards in the leg, and chaos erupted. Eli dove behind a pillar and opened fire. Billy rolled, grabbed the fallen rifle, and let loose a storm. The fort exploded with noise. Men screamed. Stone shattered. The judge disappeared into the back like a rat crawling into a hole. Billy fought like he was born in war, calm, ruthless, every shot landing. One by one, the judge's men dropped, their ambush broken by fury they hadn't expected. But there were too many. A bullet grazed Billy's arm. Another slammed into Eli's side. He fell with a grunt, still firing from the ground. Billy dragged him behind a broken wall. "You good?" he asked, reloading. "Still breathing," Eli coughed, blood in his mouth. "Go get the bastard." Billy nodded and stood, eyes burning. He kicked through the ruins, following the trail of blood and footprints deeper into the fort. At the back, through a stone arch, was the judge's private chamber, lit by oil lamps, filled with papers, chains, and ledgers, with names scratched in red ink. Billy stepped in slow. The judge stood by a desk, holding a pistol, shaking now. "You don't understand," he said. "I keep order. I keep the darkness from swallowing these people." Billy raised his gun. "You are the darkness." The judge fired, missed. Billy didn't. The shot slammed the man against the books. He slid to the ground, silent, just another name scratched from the wrong side of history. Billy stood over him, breathing hard. "Court's adjourned," he muttered. Then he set fire to the papers, watched them curl and blacken, watched every lie and threat and stolen name burn. Justice didn't wear a robe. It rode on tired horses and bled in the dust. Smoke poured out the back of the old fort like the ghost of every soul the hand had crushed. Billy walked through it, carrying Eli over his shoulder. The sun had dipped below the ridge, casting the sky in a bruised purple haze. By the time they reached the horses, Billy could barely breathe, but he didn't stop. He laid Eli down gentle. Blood soaked his side, eyes half-lidded. "Don't die," Billy said quietly. Eli cracked a weak grin. "Wouldn't give you the satisfaction." Billy laughed once, dry, tired. "You're gonna be fine." "Liar," Eli whispered, then coughed. Billy ripped part of his shirt and wrapped Eli's side tight. "We're getting out of this." But even as he said it, the ground shook. In the distance, dust rose. Riders. 10, maybe more. all dressed in dark coats, no banners, no mercy. He had others, Eli muttered. This ain't over. Billy stood, eyes narrowed. Then we finish it. He loaded every round he had left, checked both rifles, and looked to the ridge. The riders were close now, shadows with teeth, thunder in their hooves. Billy didn't wait. He met them head on. First shot dropped the lead horse. The second cracked a man's skull. But the rest kept coming, a swarm of rage and steel. Billy reloaded, ducked behind a rock, fired again. Dust and blood flew. One rider dismounted, tried to flank. Billy took him down with a knife to the throat. Still more, still faster. Eli, bleeding on the ground, pulled his revolver and fired from flat on his back, taking 2 men with him. But they were losing ground. Billy knew it. He grabbed Eli, hoisted him up again. We gotta move. Can't, Eli gasped. You can. Not leaving you. Ain't asking, giving you an order, lawman. Billy's jaw locked. He looked to the horizon, then to the dying light in Eli's eyes. He slung him on the horse anyway. You shut up and hold on. And they rode, bullets chasing, death reaching, dust swallowing them whole. The desert didn't care who bled on it. Billy rode like hell. Eli slumped over the horse behind him, the wind screaming in their ears. Behind them, the black-coated riders still followed, but they'd lost ground. The smoke from the burning fort painted the sky like a storm cloud made of justice. Billy's horse galloped hard, lungs wheezing, hooves kicking up centuries of dust. They didn't stop until they reached a dried-out canyon, narrow, twisted, half-forgotten. Billy slid off, half-dragging Eli down. The man was barely conscious, blood caking his side, breath shallow. Billy tore open what was left of a saddlebag, found a tiny glass vial, a leftover from an old medicine man he didn't believe in but kept anyway. He poured it down Eli's throat and prayed without praying. The kind of silent hope only killers understand. Then, from the canyon walls, a sound, soft, shifting. Billy turned, gun up. But it wasn't the riders. It was a woman. Old, wrapped in shawls, her face like leather. They're coming, child, she rasped. You brought the fire. Now they want ash. Can you help him? Billy asked, voice dry. She looked at Eli, touched his chest, whispered something in a tongue older than the stars. Then she pointed up the canyon. There's a place, she said. Stone doors. You hide there. They won't follow into the bones. Billy didn't ask what she meant. He didn't care. He lifted Eli again and followed the path, deeper into the rock. The canyon grew tighter, darker. At the end, a great stone arch opened into a black hollow carved by time. Inside, it was cold and still. Billy laid Eli down on a slab of smooth rock. The walls were covered in markings, ancient, violent, sacred. It felt like a tomb. Maybe it was, but it was safe, for now. Outside, the hoofbeats came again, slower, searching. The riders were close. Billy checked his guns. 4 bullets left, 1 knife, his fists, and a promise. No one else dies today. The silence inside the stone chamber was thick, like the air had forgotten how to move. Billy leaned against the wall, eyes locked on the narrow canyon entrance. Outside, he could hear the riders dismounting. Boots crunching gravel. Voices low, cold, hungry. Eli stirred, groaned. Billy knelt beside him. Stay with me. Eli opened one eye. Thought I told you to leave. And miss all this? Billy muttered, forcing a grin. A shadow crossed the entrance, then another. One rider crept closer, pistol drawn, face hidden behind a red scarf. Billy didn't breathe. The rider stepped just inside, 1 step too far. Billy lunged, grabbing his wrist, twisting hard. A gunshot cracked, echoed through the canyon. The rider collapsed with a shattered arm. Billy dragged him in, slammed the stone door shut. 1 down. The rest knew now. They'd come fast. He stripped the man's ammo and rifle, tossed the body to the side. Eli coughed again, blood on his lip. How many? Enough. Billy took position by the door, rifle raised. Dust blew in, followed by thunder. The second man burst in, shotgun ready. Billy shot first, clean between the eyes. Another ran up, shouting. Billy rolled, fired again. 2 more fell. The others hesitated. They'd expected a dying man, not a ghost with a gun. Then the old woman appeared at the canyon mouth, holding a burning torch. Her voice boomed, ancient and commanding. The wind shifted. The riders froze. One backed away, another dropped his weapon. The rest turned and fled. The woman stepped inside, eyes glowing like firelight. "You walk with death," she said to Billy. "But death listens to you." Billy stared at her, chest heaving, gun still raised. "He gonna live?" She looked at Eli, touched his forehead. "If he wants to." Billy sat down finally, the weight of the night crashing down on him. His hands were shaking, his face covered in dust and sweat. He looked around that stone tomb, at the dead bodies, at the man who refused to die, and whispered to himself, "Ain't no badge worth this." But deep down, he knew it was never about the badge. Billy didn't sleep. He sat with his back against the stone wall, eyes open, gun across his lap. Eli was breathing better, but shallow, like his body was still deciding whether it wanted to keep fighting. The old woman had disappeared without a sound, like she was never real to begin with. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, carrying voices that weren't there. Memories, maybe. Ghosts, maybe. Or just the noise a man hears when he's been too close to the edge for too long. Billy stared at the entrance, watching the pale dawn creep in. No more footsteps, no more riders, just the slow return of a world that didn't know what had just happened in the dark. He stood up, stretched the stiffness from his joints, and stepped outside. The sky was a soft orange now, and Dry Hollow was a day's ride away. Eli needed a doctor, a real one, and Billy didn't trust anyone in that town. He knew a place further west, across the ridge, where they didn't ask questions and patched up bullet holes for whiskey and silence. He packed what he could, found a spare canteen on one of the dead men, and rigged up a sling on the horse for Eli. Before mounting, Billy looked back at the stone chamber. Blood on the floor. Shell casings. Silence. He didn't regret it, not a second of it. But he felt the price. It weighed different now, like it had a shape, a name, a consequence. As they rode out, the rising sun cast long shadows behind them. Billy squinted into the light, jaw clenched. He had one more ride left in him, maybe 2. But when the next town came, and the next devil showed up in a tin star, Billy knew exactly how it would end. Not with mercy, not with peace, but with a choice. And he'd make it again, every damn time. The town of Laredo Ridge was quiet when Billy rode in, just past dusk. No saloon music, no drunks yelling in the street, just lamps glowing behind curtained windows and horses tied neatly in front of homes that locked their doors early. He liked that. It meant people had something to lose. He carried Eli into the apothecary himself. An old Mexican doctor took one look and opened the back room without a word. For 3 hours, Billy sat outside, cigarette after cigarette burning low in his fingers, boots tapping the wooden floor as his eyes scanned every shadow that moved. When the doctor came back, he just nodded. He'll live. That was enough. Billy didn't ask how, didn't ask for how long. He left a coin pouch on the counter without counting it. The next morning, he watched Eli sleep. For the first time in days, he looked like a boy again, not a man with broken ribs and shattered pride. Billy leaned down, said nothing, and walked out before sunrise. The town still slept, but the wind had shifted. Something in the world was different now. Billy could feel it in his chest, in the way his hands no longer trembled when he reached for his gun. He mounted his horse slow, adjusted the weight of the rifle on his back, and stared down the road leading east, back toward Dry Hollow, back to the badge buried in the dirt. There were rumors now that the sheriff's brother was coming, that the preacher had kin up north, that the badge still held power in the wrong hands. Billy didn't care. He'd spent years riding away from ghosts. Maybe it was time he rode toward them. Maybe justice wasn't just something you handed over. Maybe it was something you had to carve into the land yourself, with blood, with fire, with memory. He tightened the reins. The sky above him burned gold and red, and Billy rode straight into it. Billy rode until the sun was behind him, and Dry Hollow returned like a bruise on the horizon. The same crooked church steeple, the same wind-battered signs. But now the town felt different, like it knew he was coming, like it remembered. He didn't slow his horse. People peeked through windows. A mother pulled her child inside. Men who used to tip their hats now just stared, hats clenched in their fists. Billy dismounted in front of the jailhouse, the one that used to belong to Sheriff Dalton. The door was open, swaying gently in the breeze. He stepped inside, slow and sure. Empty, quiet, but not abandoned. The desk had been cleaned. A new badge rested there, polished, waiting. Billy stared at it. Then a voice behind him. "You really think you can replace him?" It was the preacher's brother, Deputy Kane. Younger, meaner, with a silver tooth that caught the light like a blade. Billy didn't answer. Kane stepped forward, hand brushing his revolver. "He was my blood. You buried him in shame. You think that's justice?" Billy's hand hovered near his holster. "I think it was necessary." Silence filled the room, thick and slow. Kane drew, but not fast enough. Billy's shot rang out like thunder. Kane dropped hard, the badge skittering across the floor and landing at Billy's boots. He didn't pick it up. He left it there, bleeding in silence. Outside, the town was watching. No one cheered, no one ran. They just stood, silent witnesses to the truth they'd all ignored for too long. Billy walked past them, boots heavy, heart heavier. He didn't come to be a hero. He came to finish what needed finishing. The preacher stood on the church steps as Billy passed. Long black coat, white collar stained with sweat and something darker. His eyes met Billy's, cold, unreadable. But he didn't move, didn't speak. Just watched, like a man praying for a miracle that never came. Billy stopped. For a moment, neither of them blinked. Then Billy spoke, low and even. "You raised a man who beat his wife and wore a badge, like it gave him the right." The preacher's jaw clenched. "And you took vengeance like it made you righteous." "I didn't take vengeance," Billy said. "I took responsibility." The preacher looked away, but that silence said more than any sermon ever could. Billy turned and kept walking. Past the church, past the saloon, past the alley where Eli had once been dragged like a dog. At the edge of town, a young boy stood barefoot in the dust, holding a slingshot, but not aiming it. Just watching. Billy stopped again, reached into his coat and pulled something out, the broken half of Dalton's badge. He tossed it into the dirt at the boy's feet. "That's what it's worth," he said. The boy didn't flinch. He just nodded, like he understood in a way only kids do. Then Billy mounted his horse, boots heavy in the stirrups. The wind picked up behind him, lifting the dust like old memories. He didn't look back, not once. Dry Hollow could keep its silence. Billy had done what needed to be done. The town wasn't clean, but it wasn't blind anymore. And sometimes that's enough. Billy rode for hours, not because he had a destination, he didn't, but because the road was the only thing that didn't ask questions. The plains stretched wide around him, gold and gray, scattered with bones of things that once lived free. Buzzards circled high above. Coyotes watched from low hills. He wasn't running. He never did. But there was weight on him now, heavier than iron. Dalton was gone. Kane was gone. The badge was broken. But the echoes weren't done. At dusk, Billy reached a ridge and looked back. Dry Hollow was a speck on the horizon, flickering in the dying light like a match about to go out. That's when he heard it. Hooves. Not one. A group. He turned slow, eyes calm, hand ready. A posse? Number just one man. Sheriff Thomas Hale of Bitter Creek, a legend in his own right. "You made quite a mess back there," Hale said. Not angry, not impressed, just stating a fact. Billy nodded. "It was already rotten. I just scraped the mold off." Hale took off his hat and scratched his head. "That's so? And what about the mold on you, Billy?" The silence stretched. Billy looked him in the eye. "Ain't nobody clean, but some folks try harder than others." Hale considered that, then offered something unexpected. "Come to Bitter Creek. We could use a man who knows the dirt." Billy shook his head. "You don't want me. You want someone who still believes in the badge." Hale smiled, tired. "Nobody believes in the badge, son, just in what you do with it." Then he turned his horse and rode off. No pressure, no threats, just a door, cracked open. Billy stared after him, the offer hanging in the wind like smoke. Billy stayed on that ridge until the stars came out. They blinked into the sky one by one, like souls watching from above. He lit a match with his thumb, held it for a second, then let the wind take it. Some men chased peace, others chased war. Billy? He just chased silence. And now, for the first time in a long while, it felt like it had finally caught up. He looked down at his hand, scarred, steady, and flexed his fingers. The same hand that pulled the trigger on Dalton. The same one that lifted Eli off the ground. The same one that had held Clara's when the world around them was still kind. People in towns would tell the story differently. Some would say he was a killer with a cause. Others would call him a ghost with a gun. But none of them could deny this. Billy the Kid walked into a town ruled by fear and left it facing its reflection. He mounted his horse, tipped his hat to the empty sky, and rode off, not into glory, not into exile, but into the kind of night that only legends earn. Because justice doesn't always wear a star. Sometimes it rides alone. If you want more stories like this, raw, cinematic, true to the bone, hit subscribe. Because Billy's not the only one with blood on his hands and truth in his eyes. The West remembers, and so will you.